Restorative justice is about communication. So it brings offenders and victims and wider victims and people that have been affected by crime and conflict into communication so that the harm that's been caused can be repaired. Communication can take many forms really, and what's really important to recognise is that restorative justice is about us taking our lead from the victim. And so often victims don't want to meet their offenders face to face. So that communication can be letters, it can be correspondence, it can in fact be taped video recordings between participants, because we want to ensure that it's absolutely safe for the victim. Victims generally want to see the offender because sometimes there's this huge beast that they've created in their mind, and to see somebody who is another human being, seeing somebody who has got a story to tell of why they're in that predicament, is sometimes very powerful. Once we have a referral, then in the back of our mind at all times is the victim's needs. This is very much a victim-led process where we take our lead from the victim to ensure that there's no chance of any re-victimisation. Cases can take some time to progress. Some happen quite quickly, but we need to do risk assessments, we need to do proper scoping and look into the real motivation of why people want to participate. And only if it's safe will we bring people together in a room. This isn't about throwing people into a room without any planning and preparation. It's not boxing. It's a planned, considered, professional service where all our facilitators are supported and trained to a particular standard. So it really is about us listening to the victim and ensuring that their needs are met and giving them the choice. This isn't, everybody's cup of tea. Some victims, for them, the existing criminal justice system is sufficient. For others, the current criminal justice system leaves them frustrated, often with unanswered questions, and what this service provides is an opportunity to fill that gap. Not all offenders want to meet their victims. This is quite a massive step for them to take. Firstly, they must take responsibility for the crime that they've committed. So generally that means that they've pleaded guilty or some degree of responsibility. And for them, so often, they don't know the victim. For them, it may just be a name on a piece of paper, and it gives them an opportunity to do something good out of something bad that's happened. So for them, they're often carrying on their conscience just a whole range of issues, and it goes to actually assist them in their rehabilitation and moving on. A restorative justice conference is when an offender and a victim and perhaps other participants that have been affected by that crime meet. It normally takes place at a planned and considered venue, and that can be in the community or potentially at a prison. And when they meet for that first time, it's quite a scary experience. You could almost sort of cut the atmosphere with a knife, and it's the facilitator's job to actually ease people into that process. But because the facilitator has met with all the participants, the facilitator should be fairly confident that there's going to be a positive outcome, else otherwise the facilitator wouldn't have brought those people into communication. Now, the sorts of things that can happen, and I've seen it for myself, is absolutely life-changing. People hear things from the participants in the room that perhaps they're not expecting. Sometimes it's that instant apology, sometimes it's that instant handshake, sometimes it's tears because they're actually getting answers to their questions. A particular case was a victim who described how her daughter hadn't been able to sleep for weeks and weeks and weeks after the burglary. And you can imagine from an offender's perspective, that may have been something that they'd never considered. They would have probably have thought that they'd have caused some hardship to the occupants because of the damage, loss of jewellery. But to actually hear from a mother that their young daughter for weeks and weeks and weeks was unable to sleep, perhaps even doing other unusual behaviour, was really, made a difference to that particular offender. In this particular case, that offender has gone on to be an ex-offender. They've served their sentence, they're in the community, they've got a job, they're doing incredibly well, and they're still maintaining contact with that victim. One of the principles of any restorative justice process is that there is a free flow of emotions. So often victims will get annoyed, angry, upset at some stage of the conference, and the offender can see that and feel that. Equally, victims can be quite humble and actually want the offender to do something good and positive with their life. And part of the process is that they can come to an agreement, an outcome agreement, and offer suggestions and options of what the offender might like to do to repair that harm. It can be simple things like participating on courses. It can be simple things like keeping off of drugs or going on drug rehabilitation programs. It can also mean taking up perhaps employment within the prison if they're actually in a secure environment. So a whole host of things. What it can do is actually increase the self-esteem of the offender, the person that's taking responsibility. It can repair the harm that's been caused within their own family environment, because the ripple effect is not just the person whose name appears on a crime report. There are far more people that are affected by criminality. So there can be family members, there can be neighbours, there can be a whole range of people in that conference who in some way have been affected. And that's the real power of it, because the offender can hear all those different stories, hear all those different consequences and impact that their offending has had, and probably for the first time try to understand that impact. If you can have a mother or father of a perpetrator in a restorative justice conference, they have far more influence over their son or daughter than any judge, probation officer or police officer. Because so often a mother or father will turn around and say, I've lost you. I lost you for all those years that you were in prison. You weren't my son. I had to face the neighbours, explain to them what you did. So all that harm can have a real impact on changing that person's attitudes, thinking and behaviour. Because ultimately we want to stop the revolving door of offending. In terms of sort of reoffending rates and of that nature, during 2007 there was a massive academic research carried out by the Ministry of Justice over a 7-year period. And what that showed was that those offenders that went through a restorative justice process, they were far less likely to reoffend. Frequency of reoffending was somewhere between 14 and 27% compared to reoffending rates for those offenders on 12-month sentences, which is around about 50–60%. So for offenders, for the first time, sometimes they're seeing their victims, they're seeing and hearing the harm that they've caused firsthand.